The sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the rough trail. Every step she took sent sharp pains through her chest, each breath a reminder that her body was battered and worn. She had been walking for hours or maybe days. Time had become a blur. All she knew was that she needed to reach the cabin she had spotted from afar. A small structure tucked between two large boulders, almost hidden from view. The thought of finally stopping, of finally resting, pushed her forward even though every movement caused her to wince. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her hands clutched at the straps of her worn backpack. She had never imagined a hike could be so punishing, especially with the injuries she was trying to ignore. She tried not to think about the sharp pain in her ribs, the dull ache in her back, and the throbbing in her legs. She just kept moving, one step at a time, reminding herself that giving up was not an option. The thought of sleeping under the open sky with no one to help her if she fell or froze in the night terrified her. Finally, she saw the cabin more clearly. It was small and simple, made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney that had seen better days. Smoke curled lazily from the top, suggesting someone was home. She didn't know whether she should be relieved or wary. The last thing she wanted was to impose on a stranger. Yet the pain in her chest and the weakness in her legs made it impossible to continue without help. She stumbled to the front porch, her hands gripping the wooden railing as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The door creaked as she pushed it open, her eyes adjusting to the dim light inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and something earthy, a scent that felt grounding in its familiarity. She sank to the floor with a heavy sigh, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. Her ribs throbbed painfully with each breath, and she realized she could barely move without wincing. The quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps outside. She froze, unsure whether to hide or call out. The door opened wider and a man appeared, tall and broad, with rough hands and a face weathered by years in the mountains. His eyes, sharp but not unkind, took in her trembling form immediately. There was a pause, a silent assessment before he spoke. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice calm but firm. She tried to speak, but only a soft gasp escaped her lips. Her chest felt like it was on fire with every attempt to inhale. She shook her head weakly, trying to indicate that she couldn't talk properly. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate and careful, as if he were approaching something fragile. "Can you move?" he asked gently, his eyes scanning her body for injuries. She tried to answer, but a sharp intake of breath interrupted her. Her ribs protested violently, and tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She whispered finally, almost inaudibly, "They're broken. My ribs are already broken." The man didn't flinch. He didn't recoil or question her. Instead, he knelt down beside her, placing a steadying hand on her back. The warmth of his touch was immediate, grounding her in the moment. He guided her slowly toward the small bed near the fireplace, supporting her weight as best he could. Each movement was careful, as if he understood exactly how much pain she could bear. Once she was lying down, he pulled a blanket over her and adjusted her position, making sure she was as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. She exhaled shakily, a mix of relief and pain washing over her. The cabin, with its simple furniture and warm fire, felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in hours, she didn't feel completely alone. He moved around the cabin with ease, fetching a basin of water and some clean cloths. He dipped the cloths into the warm water and wrung them out carefully. Then he placed them gently on her forehead and cheeks. The cool moisture contrasted with the heat radiating from her body, easing her discomfort slightly. She watched him work silently, noticing the care in every motion. There was no rush, no impatience, just a quiet, steady presence that seemed to fill the room. "You need to rest," he said softly, returning to her side. "I'll stay here until you feel safe." She nodded weakly, unable to find her voice. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, each one a painful reminder of her fragility. The man adjusted the blanket again, making sure she was tucked in securely without pressing too hard against her ribs. Then he sat nearby, keeping an eye on her, his gaze calm but vigilant. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, a soft, constant reminder of the wilderness surrounding them. Inside, the warmth of the cabin and the quiet presence of the man created a small pocket of safety, a fragile bubble where she could begin to breathe without fear. She felt a strange mix of vulnerability and trust, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed meaningless in that quiet space. She drifted in and out of sleep, her body aching with every movement. Each time she stirred, he adjusted the blanket, made sure she was comfortable, and offered a gentle word of reassurance. He didn't ask questions about who she was or why she had been hiking alone. He didn't judge or offer advice she hadn't asked for. He simply stayed, a steady presence in the midst of her pain. At one point, she managed to whisper, "Thank you," her voice barely audible. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Just rest. That's all that matters right now." She closed her eyes, feeling the tension in her muscles slowly start to ease, if only slightly. The pain in her ribs was still there, sharp and persistent, but it was softened by the sense of being cared for, of not being completely alone. She realized that this man, who she had never met before, was offering something rare and precious, safety and compassion without expectation. The night deepened, and the fire burned low, casting long shadows that danced across the wooden walls. She listened to the quiet breathing of the man nearby, the occasional snap of a log settling in the fireplace, and the distant call of an owl outside. The cabin felt suspended in time, a place removed from the dangers of the outside world, where pain could be acknowledged without fear. She thought about the events that had led her here, the mistakes, the accidents, and the exhaustion that had brought her to this remote place. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her pain without trying to hide it or push it aside. And in that moment, she realized that accepting help didn't make her weak. It made her human. The man didn't speak for long stretches, but his presence was constant, steadying. When she shifted in discomfort, he was there. When she groaned quietly from the pain, he adjusted the blanket, offered a sip of water, or simply laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Each small act was a thread in a growing sense of trust, a connection formed through shared silence and unspoken understanding. As the hours passed into deep night, she felt a fragile sense of hope beginning to take root. She wasn't healed, and she still had a long way to go, but she was no longer completely alone. The fear that had gripped her on the trail began to loosen, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. She realized that sometimes the greatest strength came not from fighting alone, but from letting someone strong and steady be by your side. By the time she finally drifted into a more restful sleep, the fire had burned down to glowing embers and the wind outside had calmed. The man sat quietly nearby, watching over her, his presence a silent promise that she would not be abandoned in her pain. In that small remote cabin, surrounded by the mountains and the quiet of the wilderness, she experienced something rare, the beginning of trust, the first flicker of hope in the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, compassion could be found in the most unexpected places. The first night passed quietly, though her sleep was broken by pain and the occasional cough that made her ribs throb sharply. When she awoke, she found the cabin filled with a gentle morning light that streamed through the small windows. The fire had burned low, leaving a faint warmth in the air. She could hear the faint sound of birds outside and the quiet shuffle of the man moving about. He hadn't left. He was there preparing a small breakfast of bread and some herbs he had gathered from the forest. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her chest. She froze, taking a shallow breath, and then slowly lay back down. The man noticed immediately and came to her side, steadying her with careful hands. "You need to take it slow," he said softly. "Don't push yourself yet." She nodded, grateful for his patience. The idea of needing help still made her uneasy, but she couldn't deny the relief it brought. He handed her a small piece of bread and a cup of warm tea, encouraging her to eat slowly. She nibbled at it, wincing occasionally, and he waited quietly, giving her space to adjust. Over the next few hours, he helped her with small tasks she could manage. He taught her how to lean carefully against the wooden railings, how to move her arms without jarring her ribs, and how to take deeper breaths without triggering pain. Each movement was a reminder that healing was not instant. It required patience, understanding, and care. She began to notice the quiet routines of his life. He chopped wood for the fire with steady, practiced movements. He fetched water from a nearby stream and tended to a small garden patch with tender care. She watched from the bed, fascinated by the rhythm of his days, and slowly her curiosity grew stronger than her discomfort. For the first time since her accident, she felt capable of paying attention to something beyond her pain. As the day wore on, He suggested she try standing with support. Hesitant but encouraged by his calm demeanor, she took his hand and rose slowly, leaning on him for balance. The pain was sharp, but he remained steady beside her, whispering words of reassurance as she took each small step. When she managed a short walk across the cabin floor, a sense of triumph mixed with exhaustion washed over her. He smiled at her quietly, proud but not boastful, simply acknowledging her small victory. Meal times became a slow ritual. He would prepare simple dishes, boiled vegetables, freshly baked bread, and occasionally some smoked fish he had stored. She ate sparingly at first, but with each day she managed more. He didn't rush her or question her appetite. He simply provided what she could take. The presence of food, warmth, and gentle attention began to ease the rawness she had felt from her injuries and isolation. Conversations were limited at first. She spoke in fragments, mostly about the simplest things: the way the sunlight fell through the windows, the sound of the wind through the trees, or a bird she had seen outside. He answered in quiet, measured tones, never pressing for more than she was willing to share. There was an understanding between them. Words were not always necessary for connection. He seemed to know instinctively when she needed silence and when she needed encouragement. She started to tell him bits of her story, small pieces at a time. She spoke of the accident that had left her injured, and of the journey that had brought her to this mountain. He listened, never interrupting, offering small nods or brief comments that showed he understood. She felt an unfamiliar sense of being heard, of being acknowledged without judgment. It was strange and comforting, a reminder that human connection could exist even without familiarity. One afternoon, she attempted to sit outside on the small porch. The sunlight was warm and the mountain air was crisp. He helped her into a chair, placing a blanket around her shoulders. The effort of moving still caused sharp twinges in her ribs, but the beauty of the landscape distracted her. She watched the shadows of the trees stretch across the rocks, the river glinting in the distance, and she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. During these quiet moments, she began to notice more about him. His hands were calloused from work, but his touch was gentle. His movements were deliberate and thoughtful, showing a respect for both the land and the people around him. He didn't demand anything from her, nor did he expect gratitude. His help was given freely without expectation, and that generosity of spirit began to affect her deeply. Pain still accompanied every action. Simple tasks like drinking water or turning her body in bed caused sharp stabbing sensations, but the constant care he provided made the pain manageable. There was no shame in needing help here. Instead, it was met with understanding and patience. She began to realize that allowing herself to be vulnerable was not a weakness, but a step toward recovery. The days blended together. She slept more deeply now, her body slowly regaining strength. He continued his routines, feeding her, helping her move, and silently guiding her through the early stages of healing. Occasionally, they would share quiet conversation, talking about the forest, the weather, or small details of the mountain life. The simplicity of it all was soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind in the city. One evening, after a particularly painful coughing fit, she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't know how much more I can take." He leaned down, steadying her in his arms, his presence solid and unwavering. "You are stronger than you realize," he said gently. "And you are not alone. I will stay with you through it." The words struck her in a way she hadn't expected. They weren't dramatic or filled with sentiment. They were simple, honest, and grounding. For the first time, she felt the weight of fear and isolation lift slightly. The pain didn't disappear, but it became easier to bear because she knew someone would be there, supporting her every step of the way. Over the next few days, she began to regain small amounts of independence. She could move about the cabin with minimal support, and even helped with small chores under his watchful eye. He encouraged her gently, never pushing too hard, always aware of the limits her body still faced. The bond between them grew, silent but strong, built on mutual respect and the shared experience of the quiet, rugged mountain life. They spent long hours in companionable silence, sometimes working together, sometimes simply sitting near the fire. The rhythm of their days was unhurried, filled with simple acts of care that allowed her to slowly heal both physically and emotionally. She began to trust him not just with her safety, but with the parts of herself that had been locked away for so long, the fears, the regrets, and the quiet longing for connection. By the end of the week, she could walk more confidently, though each step reminded her of the fragility of her body. He remained close, never intrusive, always ready to offer support or comfort. She realized that healing was not a linear process, but a series of small victories, each made possible by patience, care, and the steady presence of someone who refused to let her face her pain alone. The mountain, once intimidating and isolating, now felt like a protector. The cabin, once a mere shelter, had become a sanctuary. And the man, once a stranger, had become a steady anchor in the storm of her recovery. She understood that the true strength she had been seeking was not just in her own resilience, but in the willingness to accept help and trust another human being. By the time the sun set on the 7th day, casting golden light across the peaks, she felt a sense of accomplishment and hope. She had survived the pain, endured the fear, and learned to rely on another without losing her dignity. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since her accident, she believed that healing, both of body and spirit, was possible. And she knew that as long as he remained by her side, she would not have to face it alone. Days turned into a week, and her body slowly began to regain strength. Each morning the mountain man would check on her carefully, making sure she could manage basic movements before attempting anything more. Even simple things like sitting up or walking across the cabin were challenges that she faced with a mixture of determination and fear. He never rushed her, never pressured her, and the patience in his presence became a quiet comfort she had come to rely on. As she grew stronger physically, her mind began to wander more freely. She found herself thinking about the life she had left behind, the noise, the crowds, the constant pressure to keep moving, to keep performing. The mountains offered something different: quiet, space, and time to think. She realized how much she had needed a place like this, even if she hadn't known it. The simple rhythm of life, the tasks they completed together, and the shared silences started to heal something inside her that went beyond her injuries. One afternoon, she managed to walk to the small garden patch outside the cabin with his steady support. She leaned heavily on his arm, and with each step, her ribs protested, sending sharp pains through her chest. She gritted her teeth, determined to continue, and he whispered encouragements that were gentle and calm. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and humility, recognizing that she could not have reached this point without him. They tended the garden together, pulling weeds, planting small seeds, and checking the growth of the herbs. The man showed her how to use the tools properly, making sure she wouldn't strain herself. She listened closely, not just to his instructions, but to the way he spoke about life here. He didn't talk about people or social expectations. He spoke of patience, persistence, and respect for the land. It was a different kind of wisdom, rooted in experience rather than books or lectures. During these moments, she began to share more of herself. Small fragments at first, memories of her childhood, fleeting thoughts, things she had never said aloud. He listened without interrupting, offering only small nods or quiet words of understanding. She noticed that talking about her past, even in small doses, felt like a release. It didn't erase the pain she carried, but it made it lighter somehow. One evening, after a particularly long day of movement and light chores, she sat near the fireplace, her body tired but her mind restless. She glanced at him, watching him clean and organize tools with methodical care. Finally, she asked softly, "How do you stay so calm all the time?" He paused, looking up at her with steady eyes. "Life teaches you patience," he said simply. "The mountains don't hurry, and neither should we. You've been through a lot. I just try to help where I can, and I do it carefully because rushing never helps." His words struck her in a way she hadn't expected. There was no judgment, no pity, only honesty and quiet strength. She realized that she had been moving through life too quickly, carrying too much alone, never allowing herself to rest or accept help. Here in this remote cabin, she was learning a different kind of strength, the strength to be patient with herself and to accept the care of others. As the days passed, her physical therapy continued in small steps. She practiced walking longer distances, sitting up without assistance, and performing basic stretches to keep her body from stiffening. Each success brought a sense of accomplishment, a quiet victory that made her feel more capable than she had in months. The mountain man encouraged her without pushing, celebrating each achievement with a simple smile or a nod, letting her recognize her own progress. At night, they would sit near the fire together, sharing the warmth in companionable silence. Occasionally, she would ask questions about his life in the mountains, but he spoke sparingly, revealing little. Instead, he shared small stories about the land, about animals he had seen, and about the natural rhythms of the seasons. There was a sense of trust growing between them, built on shared silence and small gestures of care rather than words. One night, she was woken by a sudden pain in her ribs from a coughing fit. She gasped sharply, clutching her side, and whispered in fear, "I don't know if I can take this much longer." He was immediately at her side, steadying her with a hand on her back and another supporting her head. "Breathe slowly," he instructed gently. "You are stronger than you think. We'll get through this together." The warmth of his hand, the calm in his voice, and the steadiness of his presence helped her focus on each breath. She realized in that moment that his support went beyond physical assistance. It was emotional, grounding, and unwavering. She felt herself leaning into him, not just for balance, but for reassurance that she was not facing her pain alone. After the fit subsided, he adjusted her position in bed, making sure the blankets were tucked comfortably around her. He remained nearby, a quiet sentinel, until she drifted back into sleep. She thought about the countless people she had met in her life, the brief connections and passing acquaintances, and realized how rare it was to find someone who would stay by your side so consistently, without expectation, without judgment. In the following days, she found herself talking more openly. She shared memories of past disappointments, lost opportunities, and moments of fear she had never voiced. Each revelation was met with patience, sometimes with a gentle word, sometimes with silence. She began to understand that healing was not just about her body. It was about the trust she could place in another human being, about allowing someone to hold space for her pain without rushing her or making her feel weak. The mountain man, though still reserved, became a mirror of quiet strength. His actions, his patience, and his unwavering presence spoke volumes about the kind of person he was. She began to notice the small things, the way he would pause to ensure she was comfortable, the careful way he handled tools and fire, and the way he seemed to understand the balance between action and stillness. One afternoon, she ventured further outside, assisted by his steady hand. They walked toward a small stream that flowed gently through the valley. The sound of the water was soothing, a constant rhythmic presence that seemed to echo the steady care he had given her. She knelt by the edge of the stream, dipping her fingers into the cool water, and felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time since her accident, she allowed herself to feel present in the moment without fear. He sat nearby, watching her carefully, but without intrusion. Occasionally they would exchange a few words, simple observations about the water, the birds, or the way the sunlight reflected off the rocks. These small exchanges felt grounding, a reminder that connection could be quiet and unassuming, yet deeply meaningful. Back at the cabin, they continued their routine. She helped with light chores when possible, like sweeping the floor or arranging firewood. Each task was a challenge, but one she met with growing confidence. He encouraged her gently, offering support only when necessary, letting her develop a sense of independence while still being there to catch her if she faltered. One evening, she confided in him about her fear of returning to the city and facing the pressures she had left behind. "I don't know if I can go back," she admitted, her voice low and uncertain. He nodded, understanding without judgment. "You don't have to decide yet. Focus on now, on what you need to recover. The rest will come in time." His words, simple and steady, offered a reassurance she hadn't found elsewhere. She realized that recovery wasn't just about her body. It was about regaining a sense of self, rebuilding trust in herself and in others, and learning to face life's challenges with patience and support. As the week came to a close, she felt a quiet pride in her progress. Her ribs still ached and her body was far from fully healed, but she was moving with more confidence, speaking with more openness and trusting more freely. The mountain man had shown her that strength came in many forms, not just physical resilience, but also the willingness to accept care, to share burdens, and to trust another human being with your vulnerability. By the end of this third week in the cabin, the bond between them had grown deeper. It was not a bond built on words or grand gestures, but on small acts of care, patience, and presence. She had begun to understand that true connection was often quiet, unassuming, and steadfast, and in the safety of the cabin, with the mountains surrounding them, she felt a sense of hope for the first time in months, a hope that she could heal, endure, and eventually, reclaim her life with strength and courage. The days in the cabin passed with a quiet rhythm, each one blending into the next. Her body was slowly regaining strength, and the sharp pains in her ribs were becoming more manageable. She could now walk across the cabin floor without needing his hand for every step, though she still leaned on him for balance when venturing outside. Each small victory was celebrated silently, with a nod or a brief smile, a shared understanding that progress was precious, even if slow. They spent mornings tending to the cabin and the small garden. She learned to chop wood carefully under his watchful eye, the weight of the axe manageable now that her body was stronger. She carried water from the stream, moving slowly and deliberately, her breaths deep and steady. The man always remained nearby, a silent guardian, never pushing her beyond her limits. The patience in his actions taught her that healing wasn't just about the body. It was about pacing oneself, respecting limits and allowing time for recovery. Afternoons were often spent outside, walking along the gentle slopes near the cabin. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. She marveled at the beauty of the landscape, noticing small details she had missed before, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the delicate pattern of moss on a rock, or the song of a bird hidden in the trees. He moved beside her, steady and calm, occasionally pointing out something he thought she would enjoy. The simplicity of these moments made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. During these walks, their conversations grew deeper. She shared memories of her life before the mountains, moments of joy and sorrow alike. He listened, never judging, sometimes offering a few words of quiet understanding. His presence was grounding, allowing her to speak freely without fear of rejection or misunderstanding. She began to realize that trust was being built not just through words, but through the consistency of care and the quiet reliability of someone who would not leave her side. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, she sat on the porch watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The wind was cool and the fire inside the cabin crackled softly. She felt a mix of exhaustion and contentment, her body tired but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. He joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. They sat in silence, sipping slowly, each absorbed in the simple beauty of the moment. She finally spoke, her voice soft but thoughtful. "I never imagined life could be like this. Quiet, simple, but still so full." He nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "The mountains teach you things the city cannot. Patience, resilience, and the value of small moments. You've been through a lot, and you're learning to carry it differently now." She felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from the fire, but from the quiet acknowledgement of her journey. His words weren't dramatic or sentimental. They were honest and grounded, and that honesty gave her comfort. She realized that healing wasn't about escaping pain entirely, but learning to live with it while moving forward, supported by someone who understood. The nights were calm, filled with the gentle sounds of the forest outside. Sometimes she woke to a coughing fit or a sudden ache in her ribs. Each time he was there, steady and unwavering, adjusting her position, offering a sip of water, or simply holding her until the pain subsided. She began to recognize that his presence was more than physical support. It was emotional safety, a reminder that she didn't have to face hardship alone. Their bond deepened through these shared routines. She began to help with chores she once thought impossible, sweeping the floor, arranging firewood, and tending to the small garden. Each action was careful and deliberate, but she approached it with growing confidence. He guided her gently, allowing her independence while being ready to assist if needed. Through this balance, she felt a sense of empowerment and trust that had been absent from her life for a long time. One day, while carrying a small basket of herbs from the garden, she stumbled slightly, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. He was immediately at her side, steadying her and helping her sit on a nearby rock. She exhaled shakily, feeling both frustration and relief. "I thought I was stronger than this," she admitted quietly. He smiled gently, not in mockery but in understanding. "Strength isn't about never faltering. It's about rising each time you stumble, about patience with yourself as much as with the world." The words resonated deeply. She realized that she had been harsh on herself for needing help, for experiencing pain, and for moving slowly. Here she was learning a new kind of strength, one built on patience, resilience, and trust in those who care for you. She felt gratitude not only for his support, but for the lessons embedded in his quiet actions. Over the following days, they continued their routines with growing ease. She was able to carry out tasks that once seemed impossible, each success reinforcing her sense of capability. They shared meals at the small table by the fire, simple but nourishing, each bite a reminder of sustenance and survival. They spoke occasionally, exchanging stories of the mountains, small observations about the weather, or recollections of past experiences. The conversations were light yet meaningful, creating a sense of companionship that was both comfortable and profound. One evening, after a long day of work, she sat quietly, reflecting on how far she had come. Her body was not fully healed, but she was stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own resilience. She looked at him, noticing the quiet steadiness in his posture, the calm in his gaze, and the way he seemed to understand her without needing explanations. She felt a deep sense of connection, a recognition that trust had grown between them, solid and unspoken. The following morning, they decided to venture further into the nearby woods, a cautious excursion to test her endurance. She walked slowly, leaning on his arm when necessary, feeling the aches in her ribs but also the exhilaration of movement and fresh air. They paused by a small clearing where sunlight streamed through the trees, illuminating the forest floor in golden light. She breathed deeply, savoring the moment, feeling alive and present in a way she hadn't in a long time. As they returned to the cabin, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Each step had been a victory, each breath a triumph over the lingering pain. She realized that healing was a journey of small moments, each one contributing to a larger transformation. The mountain man had become more than a caretaker. He was a guide, a steady presence, and a reminder that resilience and compassion often walk hand in hand. In the evenings, they continued their routine of sitting by the fire, sometimes speaking, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. She began to open up about her fears and hopes, sharing pieces of herself that she had long kept hidden. He listened with patience and empathy, never pushing for more than she was ready to reveal. Through these interactions, she discovered that trust was built not in grand gestures, but in consistent, caring presence. By the end of this 4th week, she could move through her days with increasing independence, her confidence returning alongside her strength. She had learned to navigate pain with patience, to accept help without shame, and to find beauty and meaning in the simple routines of life in the mountains. The bond between them had deepened into a quiet, unspoken understanding, a partnership grounded in care, respect, and shared experience. As she lay in bed that night, reflecting on the past weeks, she felt a sense of peace. Her ribs were still tender, her body not fully healed, but her spirit was stronger. She had discovered that true strength came not from enduring pain alone, but from allowing oneself to be supported, from trusting another human being to stand beside you in moments of vulnerability. And in that realization, she found hope, courage, and a quiet joy that had been absent from her life for far too long. By the time the 5th week arrived, her body had grown noticeably stronger. The sharp, constant pain in her ribs had dulled into a lingering ache, manageable and not overwhelming. Each movement came with a sense of accomplishment rather than dread. She could walk longer distances, tend the garden with more confidence, and even manage light chores without assistance. The mountain man remained nearby, offering support only when necessary, his presence a quiet reassurance rather than a constant intervention. They began to venture further into the surrounding forest, exploring trails that had seemed impossible just a few weeks earlier. Each step she took was measured and cautious, but also filled with a growing sense of freedom. The mountains, which had once felt daunting and isolating, now offered a space of beauty and renewal. She noticed the changing colors of leaves, the patterns of sunlight through the branches, and the gentle sounds of the forest. The world outside the cabin felt alive, and she felt alive within it. One afternoon, they reached a small hilltop overlooking the valley. She paused, breathing deeply, feeling the cool wind against her face. The man stood beside her, steady and calm, watching her with quiet attention. She felt a swell of gratitude and admiration for him, not just for his help, but for the way he had guided her recovery with patience and understanding. "I can't believe I made it here," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "A few weeks ago I could barely stand." He nodded, a small smile on his lips. "You've been patient with yourself. That's what makes the difference. Strength isn't just in the body, it's in the heart and mind too." She realized the truth in his words. Her journey had not been solely physical. It had been emotional and mental as well. She had learned to trust, to accept help, and to face her fears with courage. The mountain man's quiet guidance had shown her that resilience comes not from pushing alone, but from moving forward with support and care. As they returned to the cabin, she felt a growing sense of independence. She began to take on more responsibility for daily tasks, cooking simple meals, gathering firewood, and tending the garden. Each action, though small, reinforced her confidence. The mountain man observed silently, offering advice only when needed, allowing her to discover her capabilities on her own. This balance of support and independence strengthened not only her body but also her spirit. The evenings became moments of reflection and quiet companionship. They would sit by the fire, sipping warm tea, sharing stories of the mountains, or simply enjoying the silence. She began to open up more about her past, her fears, her regrets, and the lessons she had learned through hardship. He listened patiently, offering only gentle observations or simple words of understanding. The trust between them had deepened, rooted in shared experience and consistent care rather than grand declarations. One evening, she reflected on the journey she had taken over the past weeks. The pain, the fear, and the isolation had all been part of a process that led her to a stronger, more grounded self. She looked at the mountain man, realizing that his presence had been a constant anchor, steadying her in moments of doubt and discomfort. She felt a quiet gratitude for his patience, his wisdom, and his unwavering support. The next morning, they decided to visit a stream farther down the valley. She walked with more confidence now, her movements smoother and more deliberate. The sound of flowing water was soothing, and she knelt by the edge, letting her fingers trace the cool surface. He stood nearby, watching her with a quiet pride. It was a simple moment, yet it held a profound sense of accomplishment and healing. During the walk back to the cabin, she spoke about her hopes for the future, for the first time allowing herself to imagine life beyond recovery. She spoke of wanting to continue exploring, to reconnect with people, and to face challenges with the strength she had gained. He listened, nodding occasionally without judgment or pressure. His presence had taught her that progress could be gentle, that patience could lead to transformation, and that trust in oneself and others was essential. Back at the cabin, they continued their routines, but she took on a greater role in maintaining the space. She swept the floor, tended the fire, and prepared meals. Each task was done with care and attention, a reflection of her growing confidence and capability. He offered guidance when needed, but largely allowed her to manage on her own, reinforcing her sense of independence. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she turned to him and said softly, "I don't think I would have made it without you." He looked at her with steady eyes, his expression calm and thoughtful. "You made it yourself," he replied. "I just helped you along the way." The strength was always yours. She felt a deep sense of understanding in his words. The journey had been challenging, but she had faced it with courage and determination. His support had been invaluable, but it was her resilience, patience, and willingness to trust that had carried her through. She realized that healing was not just about physical recovery. It was about reclaiming a sense of self, finding hope, and learning to navigate life with patience and confidence. In the following days, they continued their routines with ease and comfort. She walked longer distances, tended the garden with minimal assistance, and even began to prepare simple meals independently. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced her confidence and her sense of accomplishment. The bond between them remained strong, grounded in trust, shared experience, and quiet companionship. The mountains, once intimidating and isolating, had become a source of strength and renewal. The cabin, once a simple shelter, had become a sanctuary where she could heal, grow, and learn to trust again. The mountain man, once a stranger, had become a steady presence, a guide, and a source of inspiration. Through his patience, care, and understanding, she had discovered the power of compassion, resilience, and trust. By the end of the 5th week, she could move through her days with confidence and independence. Her ribs, though still tender, no longer limited her movements or her spirit. She had learned to navigate pain, embrace patience, and trust in the support of another human being. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been transformative, teaching her lessons that would remain with her for a lifetime. As she lay in bed that night, reflecting on the past weeks, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. The mountains, the cabin, and the mountain man had all played a role in her recovery. But ultimately, it was her own resilience, courage, and willingness to trust that had brought her to this point. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of the man nearby, knowing that she had not only healed physically, but had also reclaimed a sense of self, hope, and strength that would carry her forward into the future.